What's up, everybody? Richard Dolan here for a courageous conversation.
Well, man, today you're right. There's no going back.
How do you feel the weight of that desire?
I have been there for a while.
The story's still being written, and you cut the story short. As they say, I'm playing with house money.
They said, neo-fascist.
You can't imagine, Richard. I've heard everything now.
But I'll tell you what, you ain't never buying your time back. Value your time.
Once you start a courageous conversation, there ain't ever going back to an ordinary one. Why don't we give Max a real big warm welcome. This is a courageous conversation against COVID. Ladies and gentlemen, good to have Mr. Maximillion Cooper in the house. Hey, Max, aside from an incredible introduction, which I've got all prepared for. Yes, we can give him an applause. I saw that digitally. I saw that. When I reached out to Max, there's so many ways I can introduce Max to you all as, known as the founder of this incredible institution called Gumball 3000. And for anybody that's really up for some really good reading, I take this into the bathroom every time I go in there. And I haven't quite gotten through it, but as you can tell, but a beautiful gift that always is front and center of my home. But not only known as the incredible husband to the gorgeous and most talented Eve, the rapper, but an incredible father to some incredible children. I mean, he's been revered as a best friend among some of the most iconic people, leaders, icons in the world, whether it's a David Hasselhoff or a David Beckham or a Tony Hawk. But I think aside from all those wonderful things, I've never come across a cooler cat that really was a walking demonstration of living his passion. I mean, everything about Max is just that he's really on purpose because he lives his passion. So Max, would that be a real great way to introduce you, sir?
It's an honor to hear such amazing words. But yes, I mean, I'm very thankful that what I do across many sort of genres combines all my passions, basically. So I'm very lucky in that sense.
Well, it's good to see you, my friend. So thanks for doing this. As we've been doing this now for just over 6 weeks, as we have friends all around the world, and thanks to our partners at Google, they digitized this and pushed this out to just under 200,000 of our closest friends and family members. So we're delighted to let this be shared with our very close friends to edit out any the inappropriateness, which I'm guaranteed to give. So that we can
when it actually kind of goes out, when it's edited and it goes out sort of everywhere. But I have to mention that this weekend would be the start of this year's rally in Toronto. And so I'm sat here in London kind of thinking what would have been if I was in Toronto today.
And how apropos that we selected this particular day to have this particular conversation. Absolutely. I'm sitting in Toronto. So here's to you, my friend.
Cheers.
Okay, so here's where we got to start. For everyone that's checking in, these conversations have always been about looking on the landscape, searching the world, and finding people that we're inspired by and are moved by their courage to do what they love doing, their courage to persevere the way they are. So Max, with that setup, first of all, let's start with you as a dad, as a leader, as the coolest cat I know. How have you and the Cooper family been coping during this COVID-19 era?
I mean, we're all in the same boat. So, it's one of those things that I'm kind of dealing with it in the best way that I possibly can. When you employ a lot of people and you're putting a lot of events on and people are excited by what you do, when this sort of comes along and everything is stopped, it's really tough. I mean, like I said, this week, this next 7 days would have been essentially putting on 40 events over 7 days in 3 different countries, including music concerts, car rally, car shows, Indy 500 activations, the whole lot really. And I mean, even this last week, we would have employed a few thousand people in the whole production of this. And so, the impact is, one, looking at it from my perspective of, it sucks that we're not out there doing stuff and having fun and putting this on, but there's a bigger impact as well. I mean, it's changing. The impact is on everybody's lives that was involved in this, both from a work perspective and enjoyment perspective. And what's Absolutely. The world like without entertainment? It kind of sucks, right?
It completely blows, for sure. I mean, as a wise man once taught me, it truly sucks balls. I mean, being caught up and held up and relegated to your home. I mean, you out of all guys, I can't see living at home very long. How are the kids coping with mom and dad at home as full-time?
Well, my eldest two, they're sort of 17 and 16, and they're in the years where in England you do these exams called GCSEs and A-levels, which kind of is your passport into university, really. And they've both been cancelled for the first time ever. So, one daughter who's 18 was kind of pretty upset they cancelled, because she was actually really ready and had done lots of work and wasn't kind of scared by exams coming. But my 16-year-old daughter, she's just like jumping hoops. I mean, she's most happy she can be that these exams are cancelled, and hopefully, because the educational system over here haven't quite figured out how everybody gets their results this year. We're just sort of fingers crossed that they get the grades they need to get just from reports and such, really. So, they're doing all right. And then my other two kids are doing lessons every day online. But that's the new normal, isn't it?
It truly is. And there's nothing digital that you can do really about the Gumball 3000. And before we get into what it is and how it started and all that sort of stuff, I mean, there's very few things in life that you just can't supplement digitally. I mean, you've got to get into a car. You've got to feel it. You've got to hear it. I mean, for those who haven't watched any of the Gumball 3000 movies that cover any one of the rallies around the world, of course, that depicts the one from Miami to Ibiza. I mean, they're all visceral. They're all about celebrating life. They're all about truly championing design. So you've got to touch it. You've got to feel it. What have you been passing your time with, though? Are you still researching the new coming cars? Are you still at least tracking where the developments are? Do you think that world has kind of paused for a while now?
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at things on multiple levels, really. I think, first and foremost, back in March, we made the call, or rather we were forced into making the call at that time to kind of postpone this year's event, because, this was we were slightly on the cusp before sort of lockdowns officially began. But obviously we were planning a music concert free for the public in Young Dundas Square in Toronto, actually tonight, the night before the rally actually would start. And that was for sort of circa 50,000 people. And then along the route, we put on, like I said before, many, many other events and parties and such. But in Havana, which is really kind of groundbreaking, taking all the cars there, doing a kind of a lap of the island and then crossing the finish line in Havana itself, we were scheduled to put on a music concert there, again, free for everyone, and a kind of a who's who lineup of artists that are all driving in the rally. And we were expecting upwards of 500,000 people to attend. And, obviously we're dealing with the governments there. We're dealing with the government and the authorities in Toronto as well. And they're all sort of, we got a great relationship with them. And they're sort of saying, you know what, it looks like public events are going to be cancelled. We can't host them. And so we were sort of, we just had to make that call, because the closer the event gets, the implementation of the production is already in motion. And not only that, because drivers taking part in this rally come from all around the world, they've got to fly their cars or ship their cars there. And the last thing I wanted really was to sort of leave it too late and have all these angry drivers sort of pretty pissed with me because they've flown their car there or put their car on a boat, and then they get told it's cancelled. So I just had to make that call fairly early on. And so, it was obviously the right call. And as things panned out in the following sort of 2 or 3 weeks, the world went into lockdown, and, every event is cancelled that you can think of. For the rest of this summer, at least. So we made that call to kind of postpone it. So we are doing the same route this time next year. Our dates are scheduled around the Indy 500. So next year's Indy 500, it means that Gumball will run from 28th of May to the 4th of June. And so essentially, by postponing it, by pushing it ahead, by pushing it back by 12 months, an element of us is sort of, we're a little bit relaxed again, because, it's a long way off. But at the same time, we can't afford a year with no more revenue, because a lot of people have already paid for this year's one, and sponsors and so on. So we just sort of, we've got to look at what we do as a company, as a brand. And I mean, thankfully, whilst people know the rally if they know the rally, if they know of Gumball, they know it through the rally predominantly. But actually, the rally serves to be our sort of backbone. And behind the scenes, we've got sort of several other Gumball companies that are cross licensing and merchandise and apparel. And I mean, we sell Gumball products right now in over 40,000 stores around the world. So we've got to kind of keep maintaining that and supporting that with sort of marketing, essentially. But it's just strange times,
It is strange times. And, whether you call it a pivot or a reinvention. At the end of the day, there's just no substitute for just good old fashioned community. And if there's one thing about Gumball 3000, you're a community. So for those who don't know, we're joined here by Maximillion Cooper, the brain, the genius, the legend, the leader behind this thing called Gumball 3000. So let's get into what Gumball 3000 is, because there are some people that are writing me right now saying, what is Gumball 3000? I heard of Max, I know Eve, love them both, but I'm really not quite clear. And I've once often said that, well, when I was growing up, and this might age me, might actually age you too, I remember seeing the, you know what I'm going to say, the Cannonball Run.
Absolutely.
And the Cannonball Run was this really, who here, just put your name in the chat room. Tell me if you remember the Cannonball Run. Jay, you can't do that because I know you're too young, but looking at you. But I mean, the Cannonball Run was this incredible collection of very famous people who drove incredible cars at the time. And they all were, in fact, to race through a particular part of the world from one point to another to win a prize. So when I first heard of the Gumball 3000, I thought, this is fantastic. There's got to be a movie about this. Of course, there was. But aside from that inspiration, I don't want to curb your, nor shape your answer, Max. How would you best describe where the inspiration for Gumball 3000 came from?
So, you know, whilst I did grow up watching Cannonball Run and those other kind of road movies of the 70s, and there's definitely some inspiration by that, I think what happened for me was slightly more organic than really kind of seeing those and trying to replicate them. Essentially, I spent the 1990s kind of combining, again, all the things I'm into. So let's say by the end of my teenage years, I was a fairly all right, proficient skateboarder. And that action sports world was kind of making my life tick. And I was sponsored and so on. And it was taking me around the world. And hence a lot of friendships with people like Tony Hawk and people in that kind of world really have stemmed from many, many years ago. I then, like a lot of other kind of late teenagers, don't really know what you want to do. I think apart from just skateboarding, sport was my whole life. That was what I was into. I think I was also into the culture of sport at a very young age without realizing it, and into the fashion of it, whether that's football kits or skate culture, street culture. I was pretty kind of always, you know, had a passion for that and interest in it. So when I was 18, I went to a college in London called St. Martin's, which is a very famous fashion school. Again, I went there because sport and art were what made me tick. I never wanted to design women's wear or whatever, which a lot of people go there for. It was always kind of a sports related kind of interest for me. But it's a, if you're in the arts world or the fashion world, you'll know of it. My tutor there was John Galliano. I was in the same class and year as Alexander McQueen and Stella McCartney and Giles Deacon, all these people that have kind of been running the fashion industry for the last sort of 20, 30 years. By pure chance, we were there at the same time in the same class. And so I had this kind of fashion world sort of suddenly, you know, imposed on me. I was in it, I was designing, living in London now at this point, part of that London fashion scene. I'm giving you this background story because it's really how Gumball came about. That I then got very lucky, and again, going back, I'm 47 now, so going back to late teenage years, a little bit younger, a bit more hair. I got asked to model for a few different brands. And
according to my notes, Speedo was one of them. Is this a rumor?
That's a rumor. No, I was very lucky. I looked very much the kind of stereotypical English kind of look that was probably popular at the time for a few fashion companies, including Giorgio Armani and Ralph Lauren. And I ended up being in their adverts for about 5 years in a row, doing their runway shows along with many other brands. But it gave me some great money at a very early age. And what did I do with that money? I didn't spend it wisely. I spent it on the one sporting pursuit that I'd never had the opportunity to do as a kid, and that was to race cars. I literally got my checks from these brands and I would spend it all at a race circuit in England called Silverstone or Donington. And I would practice at every available weekend. And I started at the bottom of the ladder in what's called Formula Ford and worked my way up. And so over probably a 6-year period of the 1990s, I was studying fashion, modeling and racing cars for Porsche and then McLaren all at the same time. And so basically also getting friendships in those worlds. And obviously, like I mentioned, some of the people were becoming famous or successful in their industries already at this time in the fashion world. the likes of Tony Hawk and that were becoming more famous in their world. And then just being in that circle of sort of racing cars, obviously got to know a lot of different drivers that went on to become very successful later on. But I was also coming in contact with some very wealthy people around the world, very successful people, whether they were the fashion brand owners, whether they were the influencers at the time in those sort of worlds as photographers or magazine editors, and also the wealthy guys that were the team sponsors or team owners in my own racing. And so essentially by the end of the 90s, my little black book at the time, my whatever we had, Filofax maybe back then, if people remember Filofax. I don't think I ever had
your Palm Pilot.
Palm Pilot. Anyway, my address book by the end of the 90s was a bit of a who's who from around the world, really. And I wanted to create something that could bring all of those people together, because they didn't all mix together. You know, my skateboarding friends and my wealthy race car owner friends didn't know each other, but I kind of felt like I could create something they both enjoy. And so a bit of a kind of a route to this, I actually tried to buy a Formula One team. And I don't know if any of you follow Formula One or are fans of it, but you know, it was my dream back then to drive in Formula One. I wasn't quite good enough. So what's the next best thing? You try and own a team. And I wanted to own a team to kind of have an impact in it, to bring this kind of music and fashion and sort of action sports culture to a slightly corporate car racing world, as I felt back then. You know, one day I'm going to events and parties with BMW, Mercedes, and McLaren, which were great events and cost those companies a lot of money to host and were very corporate and well done. And maybe the next night I was going to a fashion industry party that had very little money, but was really rock and roll, and I enjoyed it a lot more. And so I just wanted to kind of blur those industries. And so I tried to buy this Formula One team, not with my own money. I hadn't made that much money at that point, but it was with the investment of the team owner of the McLaren team I was driving for at that point. And unfortunately, we got outbid by British American Tobacco by lucky strike. They ended up buying this team called Tyrrell. And so I found myself at the end of sort of 1998, having got all these friends together, essentially told them about my vision to create a Formula One team that was going to be sexier and more rock and roll than anything that existed. I'd got all my wealthy friends together to help support the bankroll it. And suddenly we got nowhere to go with it. So what do? That's how the rally idea came about. I thought if I can kind of give all these friends of mine an experience, bring them together, instead of just for one night or a party or a conference or whatever you want to call it. I didn't want it to be like that. I wanted this to just be a fun time, not talk about creating any business out of it, just show these friends that I could organize something. And anyway, long story short, that was April 1999, 50 odd friends that I'd invited to kind of join me on this road trip around Europe, sort of said, yeah, they're it. And I organized the most amazing sort of 6 days that I could think of, staying in chateaus, having musician friends perform at different parties. And, you know, back then there was no social media. It was just the 110 people or whatever it was, 2 people in a car that enjoyed this road trip. And there were probably sort of 20 famous people in that group of people. And by September that year, Gumball got a story about a feature about that rally, that first one. Photos and editorial came out, and we got covers of GQ, Esquire, Maxim, and FHM magazine. That was in the September, October of that year. And you can imagine that would be pretty powerful still now, even though they're less impactful. But back then, that was as big as it got in media terms. And it was all, of course, it was following the stories and the anecdotes and the photos that were led by some of the big celebrities that were driving in it. But it got me awareness. It was my platform to build on. And that's what happened. You know, so what Gumball is, it's a 6-7 day road trip that brings together the most eclectic group of people from around the world. A lot of them influential in their industries, but strategically across music, film, sport, fashion, business, and other. A few sheikhs in there, a few princes, a few oligarchs, and so on. Many sports stars, and it's a melting pot for kind of an adventure. And so we created this unique adventure that people wanted to be part of. And as the media world sort of, you know, went online, fans started to hear about it, and it just sort of grew from there, really. I could tell you more about the background, but I think that's enough.
No. It's great. It's great. You know, not meaning to paraphrase, but, you know, what I get out of that, and it's the second time we had this conversation about where it started, is, you know, the first thing that strikes me is that you began to recognize very early the power of proximity, right?
Yeah.
Knowing that who was the movers and shakers and the idea makers in your world, you already had a good intuition as to who those people would be. Number two is that you really learned early the power of relationship. So you sound like a person that really understood the importance of creating a relationship. Just even you and I, it's not as if we live next door and I see you all the time, but you're really good at allowing there to be room to create a relationship to each other. And by the way, you just bought me a whole new year of getting a couple new sponsors that I was delayed on getting this year. So
and I'm going to drive in it next year as well. You've got time to prepare.
We'll get to that. We'll get to that because I've got a good story as to why I should have driven back in Vegas, but we'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
But the most incredible thing about you, and I want to say this slowly because I also want people, one of the biggest reasons why we do what we do in these conversations is to create some real teachable moments, is you didn't look to create a business. You weren't looking to find a way to make money off people. You really were stand to create an experience that you not only knew that you wanted for yourself, but knew other people wanted too. And out of that, you created an institution. Is that a fair way to summarize it?
Back then, I think I had a very strong vision to create, and I did use the word back then, to create a brand. I did want to create a brand back then that could kind of have these sort of quite eccentric ingredients, really. And knowing, I think, probably from the sort of industry background in fashion, I was always fascinated by why the public would follow and buy into certain brands. You know, if you've got choices, why does one of us buy a t-shirt from Gucci and another from Topshop? You know, or they're the same item. If it's a plain black t-shirt, it's the same thing. But essentially you follow and you're inspired by image and different cultures. And I think I was always fascinated by that. And I always thought that, you know, I wanted to create something that just people wanted to be part of. That's what it was. And I think you're totally right that I needed money back then, absolutely, because, you know, even that first rally actually put me into a bit of debt. So I needed money just to pay for ongoing business and life and everything, you know. But I always kind of had this philosophy that if I do things right and people like it, eventually the money will come.
But notice something, Max. Like, I mean, you were in debt on an exercise that brought people together. And you were all more about the relational equity that you were building than about developing cash flow for yourself at a profit.
Absolutely. But I also think that that's something in, you know, 20 years later after doing this, and I've done many business talks at, you know, universities and such. I think, you know, there's many things that people that study business, you can't study. It's impossible to study, you know, and I think, you know, there's also something about having an entrepreneurial spirit that can't be taught, that you need motivation of your own to achieve things.
Well, here's what's kind of cool is that as much as I'm a fan of yours, and of course I love your family, Eve included, but your dad is a rock star. So one could also argue that one doesn't fall far from the apple tree, or in your case, the cool tree. I mean, your dad's an artist. For anyone that really wants to look up Max's dad, I mean, this guy is a celebrated artist. You feel that some part of your creative genius and your love and affection and affinity to be creative is in the DNA, or do you think it's something that you picked up through the years of school?
I think it's in the DNA of my family for sure. And I think a lot of, when I look back on it now, you know, a lot of what I have achieved and my ambitions and motivations have come from my childhood for sure. A lot of those have been rebellions against it too, in the sense that I think my parents never really had any money growing up, but they had a really, and still have, they're still together, and they're not that old really, they're in their late 60s now, I think 68, 69. They've had a very beautiful, idyllic lifestyle. The part of the world they live in is in the English countryside in an area called the Malvern Hills. It's beautiful, kind of remote, rural England. So, part of it is enhanced by just the sheer kind of geography of where they live. But within that sort of world of theirs, money has never meant anything to them. And, I often think, even particularly recently in this kind of lockdown period, that what my dad has done my whole life is go out. They live in this very beautiful little farmhouse with a little stable block, which is my dad's studio. And my dad goes out to paint every day. And the lockdown period's been no different. He still paints every day as though nothing else has changed in the rest of the world. And I think there's something beautiful about that. In someone's own existence, in all of our existence, what we do. So much, many of us are craving and working our asses off to kind of achieve financial gains or whatever it is, but there's something just really beautiful about being able to enjoy life, being an artist, or doing the passion that you have.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And one of the many passions, I mean, cars being one, is got to be definitely bringing people together. And so that's one of your gifts. I mean, one of your gifts is bringing people together, which gets me to the next conversation. When I look at what people have learned in business school, or from trainers and speakers and the like, we often will talk about community and talk about collaboration. But out of those two, it unleashes creativity. When you bring people together, you come up with great ideas. Gosh, your name came up in a conversation with the one and only Mike Tyson just a few days ago, because the announcement's leaking out that he's getting back into fighting for charity. But I mean, I was trying to get him into a car 2 years ago in one of the rallies. So when I asked, well, why would you consider it now? And you know what he said? He said, because Max is cool. So let me ask you something. When you hear that now, when you hear the term cool, what does cool mean from your perspective at this stage of life you're in, at this state in life that you're in? What does cool mean from your perspective?
I don't know. I think if you have 4 children, you're never cool. You can never be a cool dad. No matter how much you might try or think stuff about fashion or music or whatever. My kid's having Eve for a stepmom and whatever. Both of us, we're not cool with our kids. They're just normal kids that kind of think we're out of date, old fashioned, whatever it is. So I think,
guys, check that out. Okay, watch. You got Max, right? A rumored Speedo model who's assembled the coolest car rally in the world for 21 plus years, and not only do some of the world's most eclectic, cool children, heirs, princes, Saudi prince. I mean, the coolest people get together to do this multi-million-dollar, thousands of people to pull it together. The stepmom is Eve, who's also in daytime TV, and the kids say, "Guys, back off. We got this." Is that true?
It's true. But you know what? I think that's just any other friends of ours that are similarly kind of maybe got that are famous in their world or whatever, whether it's music or sport. Kids are the same. Kids are you're never going to see your parents as being too cool. Although I see my dad as being cool now. But when you're younger, you don't. So maybe there's time for me to be. I'll have my day as being cool amongst my kids, maybe when they're older.
That's cool. That's all right. That's all right. But I'm going to get to a cool point, because this is actually a compliment to you. So some people have actually only a handful, and some of which aren't even on this call, and some will watch it later on. But they've been in my home and they see what I collect, and they see pieces of art. I love art because I was always wanting to be an artist. And the majority of my art actually is and hails from the UK.
Okay.
A lot of art that I collect, like Rika. I can go on and on, but I mean, Russell Young as another example.
Yeah.
And some people say, well,
I'm both of them. So yeah.
Well, that's where I'm getting to the compliment. So when I first met Gumball 3000, the company, I was actually under the auspice of looking for the coolest brands in the world on behalf of Google to collaborate with. When I flew into town, I didn't get to meet Max firsthand. So what he doesn't know was I got a tour of his office from one of his coworkers, which I need not name, but you know who I'm talking about, Wild Hair Willie. And so as I'm walking through, his office is not only this incredible eclectic throwback to all things cool from the 70s right to the current day, from an outrun arcade full-size machine in the cafe of a garage to, a bent up Rolls Royce, a front grill plate, that's actually fastened to a wall. But in his office, he had this most incredible art that moved me. And I'm getting to the point. When I saw that art, and I was very taken by it, and I didn't take pictures because I was being very respectful of his space. And if I did take, and I knew that if he was ever robbed, I would definitely be seen first as an obvious.
There's cameras there, don't worry.
That's right. That's right. When you admire someone and you look up to who they are and you really are moved by the leader they are counted on for being, I find that we are inspired by that. And it's rare in my life, Max, that I've ever, as cool and as slick as I am, I've never been inspired by someone else that I say, you know what, man, I'm going to collect some of that stuff because that guy's cool. And so I want to thank you for that. You lit the spark in me to collect that, and I'll take some pictures I'll send to you. But I mean, Russell Young and I are friends today. I'm seeing him next week out in LA. I mean, I've gotten to know some of the very artists that you collect and that you're friends with because of you.
Okay. That's really amazing.
But think about, that's the magic and power of you and Gumball 3000, which is bringing people together of like minds, but who have a real motivation to not just fit in and get in, but really get on. And I appreciate that about you. Do you feel the weight of the world looking to you for that kind of leadership ever?
Definitely not on a daily basis, but in the last sort of decade, I've taken on, whilst running all of whatever you want to call it, the Gumball sort of empire, if you like. Every year we work with multiple different brands as sponsors and partners. And amazingly, you know, for the last sort of 15 years, a lot of the main sponsors, if they've been sportswear brands or fashion brands, I've also been given a role as a sort of a creative director as well at those companies during that period. And so, you know, I mean, and over those years, that's been creative director at Adidas, at Puma. Now I'm designing a collection for Kappa. Done the same for many different brands, really, for watch brands, from Hublot to Armin Strom. You know, and there's pressure on when you kind of, like I said, I studied fashion design many, many years ago, so it doesn't sort of faze me. I'm never short of ideas, but at the same time, when you're tasked with designing a collection or an identity for a brand that has existed for many years before you, and something maybe you've grown up with, you know, I mean, when I was tasked with designing a range for Puma the first time, knowing that it's going to go in every Puma outlet around the world, including, you know, every Foot Locker to whatever, on thousands of shelves, you're kind of, the pressure is on. You know, you got to hope people like what you do and what your thoughts are. So, you know, thankfully, you know, I've been lucky that things have worked out.
But you see, it sounds like there's no going back. And if you all writing down notes, and if you're just joining us, before you grab that notebook, we're joined by Maximillion Cooper, the brainchild behind all things cool, also known as Gumball 3000. So privileged to be joining him for Cocktails Against COVID, if it were, courageous conversations over the Great Pond. So grateful that you joined us today, all the way in from your home in London. The point was this, is that when you look at creating a standard for yourself, there's no going back. Like once you establish that Gumball 3000, you do the first best one, then you do the second one, there's no going back. And I mean, that's the whole point. For everyone on this call and those who are watching, you know, when you set a standard for yourself that you have to live up to and through, and people want to follow, I mean, it's the most positive pressure you can put on yourselves. There truly is no going back. Wouldn't you agree, Max?
Yeah. I mean, you're completely right with that, you know, whatever, especially if you're a creator in any field almost, you know, you're whether you're designing or putting on live events or whatever, you're never looking back. You're only looking forward, and you're wanting to improve the whole time. And almost, you know, which is the scary part for me sometimes, is that even if you've got a 20 plus year career, you're sometimes only evaluated on the last thing that you did. So there is enormous pressure on every time. You know, I always think if next year's rally is a failure, or next, you know, if you're designing for a fashion brand and their collection doesn't sell, you've lost your reputation all of a sudden. You know, you've got to kind of, that's the weight that you sort of carry every time. But I think obviously, you know, you at the same time, you've got several years of experience behind you at this point. So you kind of not quite so kind of, you know, in your infancy stages of what you're doing. You've got a bit more know-how. So, but the pressure is on. And I think also I haven't sort of rested on my laurels too much. You know, I'm always kind of wanting to push the boundaries a little bit more. And sometimes I even question my own desires, because I think sometimes I can, if I put on a really successful rally or event or whatever, and it's gone really well, why don't I just replicate that the next year? I don't want to. I want to do something different next year, which is a new challenge for myself. And I think my motivation is exactly that, is give myself challenges the whole time.
Now, folks, if you're listening, I want you to just catch that. You know, I don't know if you notice this big 10X over there somewhere. I mean, it's one of my great partners that authored a book called The 10X Rule. And you embody it, Max. I mean, every time people come to my house, they go, "What's up with that Gumball 3000 helmet in the bathroom?" Or "What's up with that Gumball, doormat?" I mean, if you come to my house, there's Gumball 3000 stuff everywhere. And here's why. Right. Because it doesn't only represent a cool brand, which I enjoy wearing, because, by the way, I like the gear. It's the best. Yeah. Always super soft from inside out. Just want to say that. But more important is I love what it stands for, because I know what Max is about. He doesn't just dial it in. And for all of us, especially now, it's really easy just to dial it in, just to call it in. And every year that you host your Gumball 3000, it's always just a notch above the last year. Yeah. It's always a notch above the last year. Wouldn't you agree? Yeah, I mean, like I said, that's my challenge to myself. I mean, I think what I try and do, I treat the rally as almost slightly separately as a revenue stream now. It's more, it's like I said at the start, it's probably the backbone to the brand, and it allows me to kind of have a bit of fun still, and I still treat it as a little bit of an adventure, even for myself. So I'm taking a risk every time a little bit as well. I mean, going back to kind of anyone creating any brands, if you don't take any risks, you don't get anywhere. No, I love it. I love it. Hey, listen, if you've got a question for Max, I already got some private messages coming in wanting to ask some questions of Max. Get your thoughts together. Make sure you put your digital hand up. For those who are watching the rerun of this, we're sorry we couldn't get your answers to your questions, but I know that Max is thinking about you. Now, Max, as we move forward, what haven't you done yet that you've been dying to do? You know, beyond the cars and beyond the actual Gumball 3000, the rally itself, and all the things that fit in between all of it. What is it that you've been dying to do that you can't wait to get to? I mean, that's a very good question. I mean, you know, sometimes, I mean, there's two parts to that question. There's one part, what am I dying to do still on a personal level? I mean, my whole life is integrated into the business. It's hard to separate sometimes, but there's probably still some life goals and, you know, boxes to tick on what I want to do personally, as well as business ambitions, you know, which, you know, I think the thing for me with the business side of it is that thankfully, whatever I've created with Gumball, because its ingredients are made up of multiple kind of industries in a way, even though it's sort of spearheaded by this car road trip, the brand we can put to anything. You know, there could be a Gumball airline, there could be a Gumball chain of, whether it's clubs or retail stores and coffee shops, whatever. You can put your name to things that you can put the brand to things that I think have values of being, you know, multifold really, either cool and fun or high-end and exclusive, because we have a bit of both in that. You know, we have, within the brand, you've got an element of it that appeals to a very successful genre, circle of people that have made it in life already, that are the ones that could afford to pay to enter the rally. It's the bucket list thing to do if you've made it, if you're a celebrity in whatever field, maybe Gumball is the thing you want to spend 1 week doing. But equally, it's now got a wider appeal. So kids at school might play Gumball video games and think one day I want to drive in it, but it doesn't mean they necessarily will. It's a bit like playing a football game and saying I want to play for Manchester United. It doesn't mean you're going to, but you aspire to. And I think that's an important part of what this has created, that it's kind of, it's aspirational, maybe gives people a bit of kind of ambition to achieve in life. And so where do you take the brand? And like I said, you know, you've got two parts to it really, whether we grow the public sides of it, whether we grow the kind of luxury high net worth sort of side to it. I mean, we can do, you know, on that high net worth side, I mean, over 5,000 individuals have driven in Gumball now. It's a who's who from around the world, as you've mentioned. You know, I think in one rally we had 60 plus people in the Forbes 500 taking part in it.
founders of Facebook and PayPal and so on. So, you know, it's got some really great kind of members in that sense. So it's what do we do with that? That's the kind of you know, what's our next hand? How do we play our cards right, essentially? You know, for me, I think we've been successful at growing a cool, slightly cultish, undergroundish brand. To some people, they become obsessive with it, which is great. Another asset is that it's very international. We have TV shows on around the world that feature it, that follow it, you know, whether they're in French and Swedish and Japanese and whatever. So it's done well at kind of growing a good following internationally. I think my next challenge in the next sort of, let's call it this next decade that we're sort of in now, is to kind of make it just a household name, a household brand. So it's not questioned when you're, you know, even on something like this, you know, maybe if you're into cars, you would know it. If you've seen it on Jackass or something like that, you might know it. If you're into certain people that have, you know, if you're fans of certain people that have done it, you would know it. But I want to take it, I want to eclipse that and just make it a household brand name.
No, that's fantastic. You know what I don't know if you recall this, but when I first wanted to find a way to work with you, I had asked someone that you were working with, you know, what's the one car that you don't have in the rally that you'd always love to have in the rally? And I was told the Pagani. And at the time I was working with Horacio Pagani, expanding his factory at the time. Right. And so I had an NBA as a partner player, and which I can leave unnamed, but I mean, we did some really great work with Pagani for 3 years. And so I thought this was it, right? Like, I mean, y'all got to get a good sense here that, you know, it's not about being starstruck. I have a massive respect and love for Max, as a father, as a leader, as a Speedo model of past. But all kidding aside is, I said, you know what, I'm going to make it happen. So it just worked out, like the stars aligned, where I was able to not only get the car, get Pagani involved, and have it be a part of the rally to earn my right to shake Max's hand and just get in, right? I end up flying to Vegas. I had to fly to Vegas. I had to do some work with Mike Tyson on a weekend leading up to the rally. They were rolling into Vegas. Guys, Vegas. I mean, they were going to have a huge party in Vegas. You all would agree, right? You all would agree. And don't I and Mike Tyson get hit with the worst food poisoning ever because he cooked for me and he can't cook toast. We were both laid up. I missed the party. I missed the Pagani. I mean, I'm not even there. I don't get to see Max. I had to wait another year probably till I had to meet Max. Right. It was in Toronto. And so, I mean, when people ask me, well, why did you do that? It's because that's an investment into a relationship. And Max is he embodies the fact of a collection of investments that have earned him 5,000 great relationships plus. Forget about the fact that Gumball is a great institution and a great brand and worth leveraging and exploiting worldwide with great things, great experiences, but it only took him to invest in relationships. And you all want to write that down. When you invest in relationships, your return will always be positive. Your return will always be positive. So I believe that the honor I have in speaking with you right now, Max, is a result of making incremental investments in the relationship over the years, which may not have yielded an immediate return, but was always going to yield a return eventually.
I mean, that's completely true. It's the same way really as, you know, in the early stages of sort of getting my foot in the door of building this entity. You know, quite often people would say, how did you get there? How do you get to meet that person? You get yourself in the right, you know, you get yourself there, you get yourself in the right place at the right time, but you make that happen. It's not by chance. You make that happen.
100%. 100%. Well, I'm grateful for that. Hey, listen, Ken Kliniftakis from Toronto, why don't you get yourself unmuted there, buddy? And I know you have a question for Max. Max, you've got time for a couple questions as we wind this down?
Yes, absolutely.
Hey, Max. How are you?
Hey, I'm good. How you doing?
Good. Welcome. Thank you for your time. As always, this is wonderful to have you. The insights are fantastic. My question for you is, you know, given when you envisioned Gumball 3000, when it first came to mind, is it now exactly how you envisioned it, or has it sort of evolved into something, you know, beyond what it is, or what you envisioned, a greater sort of picture now? What would you say that is?
You know, I had this vision, like I said, to kind of create this brand out of all these sort of friendships that I had. But back then, when I was in my sort of still, you know, mid-20s, It was very much a kind of a youth culture kind of lifestyle brand, which is still kind of, you know, the challenge to kind of keep it that and make it that. But what I didn't foresee at the time was probably what Richard's just been talking about is these relationships with all the drivers that have participated in this. And looking back, like I said, 2 decades later, and having had over 5,000 individuals take part, it's those relationships that I didn't count on at the time. I hadn't thought ahead what I would achieve and know and be able to utilize through having this kind of, you know, essentially this, by creating this very exclusive members club. So what's come with that has kind of given Gumball far more opportunities than anything that I had on the kind of my thoughts of creating something young and cool.
So it's almost like it was a fluidity. It had to, you know, you had to move and shake with it. It was not really structured, and this was a clear path that you had to kind of roll with what was given to you. Is that right?
Well, listen, you know, the other thing is that when I did the rally the first time, I don't know if you were here at the start of the conversation when I sort of said how it came about, but you know, I put it together to get this group of friends in the same room essentially for a few days and hang out and have a road trip together. You of course bond and you know, create lasting relationships if you share an adventure with someone. What I hadn't thought of back then was for it to become an annual event. I was literally thinking of doing it as a one-off thing to get people together, and then maybe I was going to kind of just launch a clothing brand, a lifestyle brand that could kind of utilize that. But this first rally sort of showed me the power and the importance of sharing an adventure with someone, that you have this longevity about it. It's like, you know, if you compare it to maybe, you know, more traditional things, maybe or still extreme things, but let's say you climb a mountain with a bunch of friends, you'll never forget that experience. Those group of friends that you climb that mountain with, even if it was 20 years ago, if you meet them at any point later in life, you'll always get on, because you've always shared that one journey together that has brought you so close. And I think that's what Gumball's done in a larger scale.
That's great.
Well, thank you.
Thanks, Ken. I appreciate that. That's a good question. Hey, Erica, I know that you've got a question, and I know that Mike is up next, but Erica, you want to unmute yourself and ask Max before we let him go what your question was?
Thank you. And this has just been a fabulous conversation. Thank you
Hi.
very much for coming here. And
I like your background.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm cruising right now. So my question for you are, what are a few of your favorite cars that you've gotten to drive, and why?
Oh, wow. Are you passionate about cars yourself? Are you into cars?
I like cars, yes.
Okay. I mean, I've been very, very lucky. I mean, literally, I have got to drive, I think, everything that I've ever dreamed of, really. I'm probably in my top sort of 5 cars. Someone asked me this in an interview I did earlier this week, what were my top 5 cars, and I think I've managed to drive them all. A McLaren F1 GTR, really, the race version of a McLaren F1 is probably kind of number 1 up there on my list.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to say anything. Sorry, in case you needed some help.
I also love kind of classic race cars, so sort of anything from the 1960s. Probably the 60s was my favorite era. So, you know, maybe I'll list a few other cars that I love. Aston Martin DB5, race car called a Porsche 917, which was the famous kind of Gulf oil, light blue with the orange stripe over the top. Inspiration for Steve McQueen's Le Mans film, pretty much. Ferrari F40, poster car of the 1980s. And of course, I love a Pagani Huayra. There you go.
Fantastic. That's wonderful.
And I've driven them all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Erica. Thanks for your question. I know Mike C-Rock, why don't you unmute yourself and say hello to Max?
What's up, Max? How you doing, buddy? Mike C-Rock. Hey, you are cool, first of all. Let me get that straight, because, look, when I was in college, we used to listen to Eve and the Rough Riders and party,
Amazing.
and that's your kid's stepmom. So I would love to trade my stepmom for Eve. So a business question: what would you say the biggest setback is in your life regards, you know, I have a movement called What Are You Made Of? And it's all about turning setbacks into rocket fuel. What is the biggest setback that you've had, and maybe it's right now, that you use as fuel for your future or for whatever you're getting into next?
It's a really good question. It's not one that's actually put to me very often in these sort of interviews, really. I mean, there's the setbacks and hurdles all the time. And that's probably, you know, your motivation to yourself and your challenge. And the bigger you get, the kind of the weight on your shoulders, because you've got other people relying on you as well for salaries and such. But I mean, as a company, we've had a few, you know, big hurdles over the years. I mean, let's say it didn't, you know, probably almost a stereotype path for a lot of new businesses, but I didn't really make any money for 3 years at all. So the first 3 years I was really kind of, you know, paying off one debt as soon as the money came in, sort of thing. And you're just juggling your business life essentially, trying to keep relationships with everybody that you've kind of owed money to for a bit longer, to keep those, because you know at one point in the future you're gonna need those guys again. So I think the first 3 years were just a big hurdle of kind of challenges in the financial world. In 2007 we had an accident in the rally, which was a really big hurdle for us, because it was a time where the rally was kind of televised across all of Europe, and it was a genuine accident. It wasn't kind of anything that was too crazy or stupid behavior or anything. It was just a genuine sort of accident that happened, but it kind of made me question everything about what I was doing. And essentially, you know, almost at a time where you think, should I carry on doing this or not? And once you carry on, you think, I've got to go all out to make things better, bigger, safer, stronger, you know, probably put some groundwork down at that point for more longevity with the brand. That's probably my main two, really. I think, you know, like you said, right now is another struggle for all companies, really, unless you're in the business, maybe the food business or pharmaceuticals, then you're sort of, you know, your world has sort of come to a halt for a little bit. But I think, you know, we're resilient enough that this won't impact us too badly. But it does, again, make me think, how do I grow it beyond relying on certain live events that we do at the moment?
Good question. That was a great question.
Thank you.
Well
Thank
done.
you, Max.
Hey, we're reserving the last question because we've been joined with Maximillion Cooper, the real thought leader behind all things Gumball 3000 for Matt Soltis, all the way from UK, your fellow neighbor right there in London. So hello, Matt. Say hello to Max.
Hey, Max. Awesome to hear from you.
How you doing? Where are you?
I'm actually over in Cardiff this evening, so other side of the country, over in Wales.
Okay.
I split my time between here and London, so this is where I am for lockdown anyway.
Yeah.
The question I had for you, Max, was actually around the creative and I suppose the artistic side of entrepreneurship, because you spark me as someone who's you're very creative, you're very much a visionary, you love connecting to that almost your higher self, that purposeful self. I was going to ask, do you have any particular habits or rituals that you have about your day to spark that creativity, or anything in particular you do to get your state into that creative space?
Again, that's a good question. You know, I think I have never been at a loss for any creativity, which is just, you know, I'm very lucky with that. I think, you know, I'm sort of inspired by many people and many other companies that probably motivate me and give me ideas and inspiration. I'm also kind of, I think one of my assets that has maybe been discussed on here is that I do have a lot of interests. You know, I'm interested in music, I'm interested in cars, I'm interested in art, fashion, sneaker culture, travel, you know, many things. So I think I kind of pull ingredients from all of those really to kind of come up with my own version of whatever it is I'm designing at that point. But I think, you know, the one thing for me that is very difficult in having the time to design, and like you said, do I have any sort of routine? It's probably hard and it makes my life a bit difficult, but I'm a real night person. So I can spend the time in the office in the daytime dealing with, unfortunately, company running issues, which get in the way of a lot of creative people, really, and a lot of entrepreneurs. You don't want to kind of get bogged down with making sure that the company is, paying its tax returns, its gas bills, its whatever, the HR of the company. And, the more staff you have, the more issues you have with just people and everything. So I end up kind of doing a lot of kind of business stuff during the daytime. And when everybody's gone and it's quiet, I get in my zone of myself and designing or just keeping coming up with new ideas and whatever, but I need space for that. And I find that I'm very good at night, and I could work all night. I could work all night every night. and I go through periods where I have very little sleep, and then I need one day to just, chill out and recuperate a little bit. But it's tough juggling all of that with children, managing your company, time for yourself, designing. Life's a bit of a juggle.
Great question, Matt. Thank you so much for asking it. And thank you. And the sounds of that clink, it sounds like the drink is over and it's indicative of our time is up, because mine is too. I mean, from the very top, Max, you're someone who really started Gumball 3000 out of a passion of all the things that you really always have wanted to do. So I've observed you as someone who's always been inventorizing the things that you've got, the things that you're doing, and the things you've always desired to do. So the world that you live in and the life that you've lived is really a byproduct of being committed to always fully living. But as a result, I've also recognized that you've pulled in relationships that matter to you, because it isn't a wonderful thing until it's wonderful for all involved. Yeah. And even if it puts you in debt, even if it puts you behind the 8 ball, even for 3 years in a row without making a single dollar, you were a man of your word, paying back your investors and lenders to make sure that you did a good thing consistently for now 21 plus years. I've also recognized that continuing to be passionate about the things that you love and knowing your gifts also comes down to knowing your power spots, knowing that you're most creative at night, but equally respecting the time to recharge your battery, to give some room to recharge, realign, and refire. And it all comes down to really knowing yourself. I hope I've gotten that all correct in the time that we have.
You have. If you don't recharge, you'll burn out. So you've got to respect your body as well.
Fantastic. Well, I'm going to make a prediction, everybody, because it's the first and only time I'll do this with Max here and with those watching later on, is that I see an immediate need for someone like you, Max, to be able to youngify and digitize, urbanize and digitize different experiences now that might be forever forgotten and or let go of. Because of these times, these critical times that we're in, we're reinventing what it means to be social. We're recalibrating what it means to be connected. And because you are the godfather of what it means to be cool and in a community, I think there's a huge opportunity for you to lead the charge to urbanize and digitize the future of social gathering. So if you're up for the challenge, you and I will have a chance to chat about that soon enough.
Absolutely.
Are you cool with that?
Absolutely.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Folks, let's put some love in the chat room. If you've been on here, you've been listening to Max Cooper, Maximillion Cooper. Give him some love. Let him know that we appreciate him. Let him know that we send him, his family, the love, the care, and the blessings that they deserve for giving up an hour of his time to give you the best time that you've had on a Friday. Max, on behalf of...
I've enjoyed it. It's been nice sharing my evening with you.
Oh, it's been a real pleasure, as always. And Max, buddy, listen, man, I really appreciate you. So thank you again for saying hello, saying yes, and coming on in, okay?
And I look forward to seeing you in Toronto very soon.
You got it, buddy. Hey, listen, everybody, that's been Maximillion Cooper. From my home to yours, Max, send my love to Eve, the kids. God bless them. Stay safe, stay sane, and it's going to be so easy for all of you to stay sexy. Be well, everybody. God bless everybody. We'll see you at Gumball 3000.
Cheers.
Cheers,
guys. Good night.